Under a sky heavy with fog and the scent of wet soil, the village of Alugwu lay folded into the hills like a secret never meant to be spoken aloud. The huts were round, low to the ground, clustered around a single well where the water tasted faintly of salt and iron. The villagers, dark-eyed and quick-handed, lived quiet lives and feared loud questions. They said blessings before dawn, folded their mats facing east, and never spoke of the river that ran red one season every 10 years. Their world was one of pattern and protection, and they tolerated nothing that did not fit inside it. So when Naya was born during the Harmattan wind, not crying, not blinking, just watching, there was a long silence in the birthing hut. Her mother had died minutes before, and her father had never returned from the war beyond the ridge. That left only her grandmother, old Mama Eek, to receive her. The midwives muttered prayers and wrapped her in silence, but Mama Eek looked straight into the child's face and did not flinch, even when she saw the baby's eyes. They were not the usual dark brown of the village people. They shimmered, not like gold or sky but like something alive, something aware. In the low firelight, the color of Naya's eyes changed. First a deep green, then a pale silver, and by morning a flat, stormy gray. "Cover them," Mama Eek said softly. "From this moment forward." And so Naya grew up with her eyes hidden behind layers of cloth. Her grandmother tied a thin scarf across them before she stepped outside each day. People asked questions but never twice. They knew better than to pry into Mama Eek's business. The old woman had been the village's midwife, bone setter, and keeper of tales for 3 generations. Some said she had once walked into the bush and returned with 2 shadows instead of 1. Some said she buried charms beneath the elders' chairs and knew whose time had come before the birds did. With her grandmother's protection, Naya was allowed to exist. Not welcomed, not celebrated, but permitted, so long as her eyes remained covered. She was quiet, that child. Too quiet for her age. She did not play in the dust with the others. She did not throw pebbles or twist leaves into dolls. She listened. She learned. She sat beside her grandmother's mortar and watched her grind herbs with slow precision. When birds passed overhead, she turned her head before their wings made sound. When storms approached, her fingers would tremble hours in advance. The village children mocked her behind her back, calling her, the one who sees what's not there. She never responded. But if they threw stones, the stones would miss. If they tried to trip her, they'd fall instead. By the time she was 7, most gave her wide space and glanced over their shoulders when her sandals scuffed the path. It was around her 8th year that Naya began to speak less and notice more. She'd sit in the compound during gatherings and tilt her head as if listening for something no one else could hear. She'd turn toward women whispering secrets in the corners and blink slowly, her eyes hidden but watching all the same. It began with small things. She told her grandmother which chickens had worms before they showed signs. She knew when the oil in the lamp would run out, not by time but by mood. She walked to the stream only when the water was clean and never when it was dark and foaming. Mama Eek said nothing for a long time, only watched her closely as she cooked, cleaned, sat. Then one morning Naya came into the hut, her cloth askew, and said, "Auntie Ngozi will lie today." Mama Eek's stirring hand froze. "Lie about what?" she asked without looking up. Naya blinked. "I don't know. But I can smell it. It's in her voice already." They listened that evening as Auntie Ngozi stood before the council and said she had not sold rice outside the village. Later it was discovered she had. Naya had said nothing more. She simply returned to washing the cassava as though truth was a bruise she had pressed and already moved on from. By the time she was 10, the whispers had started in earnest. They said she didn't blink often enough. They said she watched shadows instead of people. They said her eyes had no color or too many. One woman swore she saw Naya's head turn before a goat gave birth, 2 hours before when it was still grazing peacefully. "She's not normal," they hissed. "She's not meant to be," Mama Eek snapped. But the murmurs didn't stop. Naya heard them all and yet she never raised her voice. Never defended herself. It was as though something larger was coiled inside her. Not pride, not anger, but patience. Deep old patience. She began to see through things. Not with her eyes, the cloth still stayed, but with something deeper. When Elder Ikenna smiled too widely, she felt the bitterness behind it. When Father Udo blessed a child, she could taste the blood in his words. The offerings at the shrine no longer smelled of palm oil and incense. They reeked of old guilt. Of bones buried badly. One evening she told her grandmother, "The prayers don't go anywhere. They sink." Mama Eek exhaled slowly and set down her pestle. "You're seeing too much now. I can't stop." The old woman studied her, eyes tired but sharp. Then you must never let them know how deep your seeing goes. They fear mirrors, especially the ones that speak back. Naya nodded. But it was already too late for that. Because even as her eyes remained covered, the villagers began to avoid her shadow. Even those who had once nodded politely now crossed to the other side of the path. The dogs barked at her. Birds fell quiet when she passed. One night, alone in the courtyard, Naya felt it. The full weight of it. Not just fear, intent. That gaze of the village pressing in on her like hands. Cold hands. Tight hands. They want me gone, she told her grandmother. No. Not yet, Mama Eek said, her voice low. But they are close. Naya pressed her fingers to the cloth over her eyes. Will they blind me? Mama Eek didn't answer. But she lit 3 fires that night. One at each corner of their compound. And from that night on, she slept with her back to the door and a knife beneath her mat. Because she knew what the village did to those who saw too much. And she knew Naya's time was coming. The night it happened, the wind blew with a strange insistence. Not wild, not loud, but steady, like breath in a throat just before a scream. Naya, now 13, lay curled on her mat beside the hearth, her face turned toward the ashes of the fire. The room was dark, save for the flicker of the coals and the shadows they stretched across the wall. Outside, the village slept under a moonless sky. Even the crickets were quiet. That was when the dream began. But it wasn't like the others. In this one she was walking barefoot through the forest. Not watching, walking. She could feel the ground beneath her, cool and damp, the leaves clinging to her toes. The trees loomed tall and silent, not whispering as they usually did. In the clearing up ahead, firelight danced, not from a torch but from something larger. A pit rimmed with stones. Around it stood 5 figures in dark cloth, chanting words her dream mind didn't understand but felt like knives being dragged across her skin. Then she saw the child. He was small, no older than 6, his feet bare, his chest painted with red and white streaks, shivering not from cold but from terror. His mouth was gagged. His eyes, wide and glossy, searched the dark like he expected someone, anyone, to stop what was coming. Naya wanted to scream. Her dream self moved closer, though she hadn't meant to. One of the figures raised a curved knife. She saw the blade flash. She saw the child flinch, then go still. She heard the silence after, not the silence of peace, but the silence of something ancient being fed. The air turned thick. The fire darkened to blue. And then she woke. Naya sat bolt upright, her breath ragged, her forehead damp. The fire in their hut had gone out completely. The embers were stone cold. She didn't move for a long time. She just stared into the shadows where the dream had left its fingerprints. And she knew in a way that had no room for doubt, it had not been a dream. It had been a witness. By dawn, she stood before the village council. Mama Eek had tried to stop her. She had pleaded with Naya to wait, to be quiet, to just hold the truth inside a little longer. But Naya refused. Because a child had died. And no one else had seen it. The council gathered in their usual half-circle beneath the Irako tree. Their faces were grim and already skeptical. Elder Ikena, always the loudest, sat in the center, a carved staff across his knees. Father Udo stood beside him, fingers tight around his prayer beads. What is it now, Naya? Elder Ikena asked. Another prophecy? More wind speak. She stood barefoot in the dust, the cloth still tied across her eyes, her hands clenched at her sides. A boy, she said. Taken into the forest. Last night. Sacrificed. Gasp. A woman in the crowd clutched her chest. Someone muttered a prayer. Father Udo frowned. Whose child? I don't know, Naya said. But he wore a white wrapper with a red sash. He had a scar above his lip. He cried silently. The silence that followed was thicker than stone. Elder Ikena rose slowly. And how do you know this? In my dream. A ripple of laughter, sharp and nervous. You bring us here to speak of dreams? He growled. It wasn't just a dream, Naya insisted. I felt the earth. I smelled the smoke. I heard the blade. Another elder leaned forward. And what proof have you? Has a child been reported missing? Not yet, she said, her voice low. But he will be. Or he already has. Ask them. Ask everyone. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A few mothers pulled their children closer. Some stared at Naya with a flicker of unease, as though her words might infect the air around them. Elder Ikena's eyes narrowed. You dare accuse us of murder, girl? I accuse no one, Naya said. I'm telling you what I saw. You always see things, snapped another elder. Your cursed eyes have brought nothing but unrest. Chickens die. Wells run dry. Now you dream of death? What next? Fire raining from the sky. A voice called from the back. She's not right. She should have been buried with her mother. Another, she's a danger. We said it for years. Enough. Mama Eek barked, stepping forward, face fierce, hands shaking. You fear what you do not understand. But that doesn't make her wrong. You defend a witch, I can spat. She is your shame, Mama Eek shot back. It is your silence that makes her necessary. The shouting swelled. The council broke into argument. Naya stood still, the noise washing over her like river current. Her hands trembled. Not from fear but from fury. Because even now they weren't listening. Even now they were trying to bury the truth. She turned and walked away. By sunset word had spread. And by morning a child was missing. His name was Toe. 6 years old. Last seen near the western edge of the village where the trees grew thick and the river narrowed. He had a scar above his lip. His mother came screaming to the council. And though they tried to calm her, the truth hung over them like smoke. It was exactly as Naya had said. Every detail. Down to the white wrapper and the red sash. That night no fires were lit. People whispered as they passed her hut. Some avoided looking at her. Others stared too long. A few came to her door with offerings, yams, cola nuts, oil. They didn't speak. They just left the items and hurried away. Others weren't so silent. She caused it, someone hissed at the well. She saw it because she made it happen. She's cursed, another said. A demon behind a scarf. She walks without eyes. That means she sees everything. The fear turned bitter. 2 nights later, a stone struck their door. Then another. Then a louder thud, a gourd of oil thrown and broken. They want us gone, Mama Eek said quietly, her face pale. Naya sat still. Let them come. No, her grandmother said, gripping her shoulder. Not yet. We still have time. But in Naya's chest, the wind had shifted. Something was stirring. Not rage. Not even vengeance. Just knowing. She had seen now, not just the crime but the fear that followed truth. How people would rather silence a girl than question their leaders. How they'd rather burn her than admit their gods took blood instead of prayer. She stared into the dark behind her cloth and said softly, there will be more. Mama Eek turned toward her. What do you mean? I saw the forest again, Naya whispered. There were more fires. More blood. I saw them feed it. And I saw what lives beneath. The night fell heavy again. And this time the wind didn't pass through the village. It stayed. The sky was red the morning they summoned her. Not the soft red of sunrise, but the blood orange of warning. A sky too full of dust, like the land itself was holding its breath. The drums started early. They boomed low and slow across the hills, pulsing like a heartbeat underfoot. The entire village gathered, drawn by something heavier than curiosity. They came in silence, wrapped in ritual colors, heads bowed as if pretending this wasn't what they had been waiting for since Naya first began to speak. The square had been cleared. No market stalls, no children playing. Just the elders' stools in a circle, and in the center, the ash pit, cold now but deep. A relic from when fire had been used to cleanse sicknesses of the soul. Everyone knew what it was for, even if they never named it aloud. Mama Eek held Naya's hand tightly as they walked. Naya felt her grandmother's pulse fluttering, a bird trapped in a cage of skin. She was 13 now, taller, stronger, but the cloth still lay across her eyes. Today she had wrapped it herself with care. She wanted them to know that she was not afraid. Remember, Mama Eek whispered, they will shout. They will twist your words. But you hold the truth. You do not let it go no matter what they do. Naya nodded once. The elders were already seated when she arrived. Akena was at the center again, his staff planted deep into the dust. His face was lined with righteous fury. Beside him, Father Udo fingered his beads so violently they snapped mid-chant. He did not notice. They said no greeting. There were no words of welcome. Only Elder Ikena's voice booming across the square. Naya of no clan, daughter of the dead, you stand accused of sowing discord, speaking curses, and claiming sight no mortal should possess. How do you answer? Naya lifted her chin beneath the cloth. I speak only what is. Gasp stirred the crowd. You claim to see what no one else sees, he barked. You dream what should not be dreamed. You speak names the ancestors themselves have buried. She turned her head toward his voice. Is that what you fear? That I speak what you've hidden? Father Udo stood abruptly. Enough. You mock sacred space. You spit on the memory of the fallen. Tell us then, If your sight is so strong, what do you see now? Naya stood in the center of the circle and let the silence settle. Then she began. I see Elder Amobi weeping each night, not for the dead son he buried, but for the second child he had by a woman in the hills. A child he left to die during the famine. The old man in the back paled, his walking stick slipping from his hands. I see Auntie Kulu burying herbs beneath her neighbor's doorstep, herbs meant to cause miscarriage. She blamed the spirits. It was jealousy. Cries of shock. Auntie Kulu shouted from the crowd, she lies. Naya turned toward her. You wore a red scarf the day you placed them. You prayed afterward, weeping, but did not remove them. She's possessed, another voice cried. She names names, someone else said. Too many. Elder Ikena slammed his staff. This is not proof. These are stories, tricks, things whispered in dreams. Then ask me what I see on you, Naya said coldly. He rose. That is enough. I see you kneeling, she said, years ago by the riverbank, holding a bowl of goat's blood, saying names into the water. His hand trembled. He took a step toward her. Stop her mouth, a woman cried. She will call all of us. She brings shame. Witch. Demon. They surged forward. Mama Eek tried to push through, but strong arms held her back. She is a child, she screamed. She speaks only what you gave her. But no one listened. The elders ordered ropes. They tied Naya to the pole beside the ash pit, the ritual stake used only once in living memory. Her arms were bound behind her, her feet apart, her back straight. Still she held her head high. Elder Ikena lifted his staff. Let her look into the fire, since she claims to see. They lit it beneath her feet. A small flame at first. Smoke curled upward, licking the air. The heat grew slowly, then quickly. The wind fed it. It rose and roared, a wall of flame that danced just below her gaze. And still she spoke. Even through the heat, even as the sweat poured down her face, Naya's voice rang out. I see your secrets, she said. I see the bones beneath your chapel. I see the God you feed in silence. I see the river's curse. I see the land turning its face away. Chant. Ikena roared. The villagers began to chant, old, harsh words passed down from elders who had long since turned to dust. Words meant to break will, to cleanse truth from the lips. But Naya did not stop. Her voice cut through their rhythm like a blade. I see the child, she said. To. I see his spirit in the trees. He weeps still. They screamed. Bring the coals. 2 men came forward with a small iron dish, glowing red from the fire's heart. The air shimmered around it. Mama Eek broke free, running toward them, but was caught again. 3 men this time, dragging her away. Naya turned her face toward her grandmother's voice. I love you, she whispered. Then she felt the cloth yanked from her eyes. And the fire filled her sight. Bang. It was unlike anything she'd imagined, not just the burning of flesh but the loss of something sacred. Her world, once full of light, collapsed into red, then white, then nothing. The smoke poured into her lungs. She didn't scream. Her throat locked. She convulsed against the ropes. And still she did not stop speaking. Let the dead speak, she rasped. Let the river tell its story. Let the bones rise. The coals dropped. Darkness took her. She didn't remember falling. Only the stillness afterward. The kind that comes not with silence, but with watching. When she woke, she was lying in the dust. The ropes were gone. The crowd had dispersed. The ash pit was cold again. She was alone. Except she wasn't. She felt them. Something in the soil shifted. The air pressed against her skin like breath. Somewhere nearby, a voice whispered. Not in words, but in welcome. Naya did not move. Her eyes were ruined, sealed shut, aching, empty. But in the center of her chest, something had opened. She saw. The first days after the fire were pain. Not the searing kind that screams through nerves, but the slow, dragging kind, the kind that wakes you before the sun, that crawls behind your eyes like ash too deep to wash out. Naya lay beneath the woven mat in Mama Eek's hut, her face bandaged with leaves soaked in cooled water and crushed herbs. Her skin was tender, blistered in patches. Her eyes were sealed in darkness forever. But she did not cry. Not once. At night, her grandmother whispered stories, old, soft things meant to distract her. Tales of spirits in trees and gods that slept beneath rivers. But Naya barely listened. Her mind had gone quiet. Not empty, no, but focused, listening for something else. On the 3rd night it came. A sound. Faint like the brushing of dry leaves. Then a voice, low, ancient, not male or female but full of weight. It said nothing at first. Just breathed in the space above her head, just beside her ear. Naya's heartbeat didn't race. She didn't flinch. She turned her face toward it and whispered, "I hear you." That night she didn't sleep. The next morning she sat up for the first time since her punishment. She moved slowly but surely. Her grandmother gasped when she reached for the cup of water, and found it on the first try. "Naya," Mama Eek said cautiously. "I'm thirsty," she replied. Her voice was calm. So, she drank in silence. And then, as though she hadn't just been maimed, Naya stood up. Without help. Without trembling. She walked across the hut and sat beside the hearth. Mama Eek stared, hand over her mouth. Outside the chickens clucked. The wind rustled the thatch. Somewhere far away someone called for a lost goat. Life continued. But not inside the hut. Inside, something new had begun. Naya tilted her head slightly. The stream has changed. What? There's silt. Too much. Someone poured something upstream. Fish are dying. Her grandmother blinked, stunned. "How do you know that?" "I heard it." She paused. "No, I felt it." She could feel the stream? No, not just feel. Sense. As if the water's memory had reached her through the dirt, through the air, through the very bones of the ground. Her body pulsed with it, strange, warm flashes of awareness. That was how it began. Not all at once, but piece by piece. She could hear footsteps in the distance and know who they belonged to by the way the earth echoed. She could walk the entire path from the well to the chapel without stumbling, even though she hadn't gone near either since the burning. She moved with the certainty of someone not guided by light, but by pattern. Like she was tuned to a rhythm older than walking, deeper than breath. Mama Eek began watching her differently. Not with pity, but with caution. "Are you seeing again?" she asked one day. Naya smiled faintly. More than before. She never used her eyes now. Not even to imagine. Instead, she saw, through the silence in her skull, a space once full of ordinary thoughts now filled with impressions. Flashes, shadows, faint colors behind her closed lids. They weren't hallucinations. They weren't dreams. They were something else. Sometimes it was a voice, soft and dry, like leaves being crushed underfoot. It told her when a tree nearby was dying, or when a snake had slithered too close to a hut. Once, it warned her of a roof about to collapse, and she shouted just in time for a child to roll away from the falling thatch. Word spread. She walks without stumbling. She drinks without spilling. She sees the rain before it falls. Some spoke of miracles, others of curses. But all agreed, the girl they blinded had not stopped watching. And the whispers began again. They said she had made a pact with the shadows in the forest. That her eyes had been burned away, but something else had opened in their place. That her soul had been pulled through fire and come out knowing. Villagers who had once ignored her now crossed themselves when she passed. They looked down, avoided speaking her name aloud. But they watched her from behind windows, from behind their hands. Children snuck to the edge of Mama Eek's compound to peek at her from behind trees. One dared approach her. He held out a pebble and asked if she could see it. She reached forward, touched his hand and said, "It's round. Warm. Still smells of the river." The boy screamed and dropped it. He ran away, not because he was afraid of her but because she was right. She began hearing other voices too. Not the village. Not the ones who still spat her name like a curse. Older voices. Deeper ones. They whispered at night. They spoke not in words but in feelings. Regret. Warning. Remembrance. They sang sometimes, low hums like a mother rocking a baby that no longer breathed. Naya understood them without translating. They were the ones buried beneath the chapel. The ones who had been offered instead of saved. The ones who had fed the fire before it turned on her. And with each night, their whispering grew clearer. "You are ours now," one voice said. "No," Naya replied softly, "I am no one's." "You saw," it insisted. "I still see." "Yes," it agreed with something like a smile in the sound. "You do." Sometimes she saw shapes too. Not with eyes, but with memory. When someone walked by, she saw their wake, like a boat on water. A shimmer in the air. A lingering shape in motion. Once, when Elder Ikena walked past her compound, she saw black smoke trailing behind him. Not real smoke, but thick and choking, clinging to the ground like mud. She said nothing, but she knew. He hadn't stopped the sacrifices. He had just buried them deeper. The dreams came again. But now they weren't dreams at all. They were maps. One showed her a hand placing a bone inside a tree hollow. Another showed a young girl crying beside a pool that reflected no stars. A third showed Mama Eek, younger, shouting in a council meeting, warning them about the red wind. When she woke, Naya would tell her grandmother. And Mama Eek would say nothing. Her silence said enough. Then came the day the earth beneath the chapel cracked. A tremor, small just enough to shake a pot off a shelf. The villagers screamed and fled. When they returned, they found a bone, human, sticking up from the soil beneath the altar. Father Udo called it a burial mistake. But everyone looked toward Naya's hut. They began calling her the night mirror. They said she reflected back everything people tried to hide. That her blindness was a door, not a wall. She never corrected them. Because they were right. And still, every evening she sat in the courtyard and listened. To the ants crawling in the dirt. To the whispers in the trees. To the spirits that never left. She did not smile. She did not cry. But in the silence behind her scars, the truth spoke. And she listened. They came for her at dusk, under the pretense of healing. Elder Ikena himself stood at the front of the procession, flanked by two of the council's younger priests. Behind them trailed a row of women with baskets of herbs, cloth, and smoke. Their feet moved in perfect rhythm as though practiced. The air smelled of camphor and cooked yam, but beneath it was something more sour, like iron or rot, hidden under perfumed cloth. Mama Eek stood at the doorway of their hut, arms crossed, chin lifted. She doesn't need your rituals, she said. She is wounded, Father Udo answered softly. And the land has not been quiet since. Naya stood behind her grandmother, still as a shadow. She heard their voices but watched their breath, their pulse, the tremble in their feet. Sight was no longer her strongest sense. She felt their lies before they spoke them. We only seek to help, Ikena said. The spirits are restless. The well's gone dry. 2 goats were born without eyes. You see? We must restore balance. Mama Eek said nothing. Naya stepped forward. I'll go, she said. Her grandmother's jaw tensed. You don't need them. I need to see. They walked her through the village like a patient, but the way the crowd parted was more like a funeral. Faces peeked from behind windows. Children clutched their mothers. Some bowed slightly but most turned away. The chapel stood near the edge of the village, older than even the Irako tree in the square. Its walls were made of red clay and stone, patched in places with newer brick. A wide wooden door sat crooked on its hinges, and a great black iron bell hung from a tree beside it, unmoved by the breeze. Inside it was cold. Unnaturally so. They guided Naya to a mat at the center of the room. Incense burned in a bowl. Words were muttered. Hands hovered over her head, her shoulders, her feet. She smelled blood. Not fresh, not old, preserved. This will not heal me, she said. Ikena crouched beside her. It will cleanse your spirit. She turned her face toward him. Why are you afraid? He didn't answer. That's when the floor pulsed. Subtle. Like breath. Naya's hand dropped to the ground. And she felt it. Not the surface but what lay beneath. Layers. Centuries. A heartbeat buried in clay. She gasped. Something shifted beneath her palm. A whisper, a memory, a presence. She pressed her other hand to the ground, palms flat, and the chapel disappeared. She was seeing again, not with eyes but with the land's memory. The soil remembered. A flicker, a young woman screaming beneath the stars, bound and trembling. Another, a child's mouth gagged with cloth, blood streaming into sand. Another, a man walking backward into the pit, chanting until he disappeared. Bones. So many bones. She saw the pit carved into the earth like a hungry mouth. Generations thrown into it, masked in blessing, disguised as ritual, all of it offered to something that slept beneath the chapel. She saw its shape, not fully, only what the earth dared show, a long, coiled thing. Too many limbs. A mouth that breathed smoke, not air. Not alive but not dead. Worship. Federal chained by soil and silence. Naya gasped and jerked back, her hands seared with the memory. Her knees gave way. The chanting around her continued, louder now. She could still hear them saying words meant to sound holy, but she now knew the truth. These weren't prayers. They were contracts. And they had been kept for a long, long time. What is this place? She whispered. You feel it, came a voice beside her, one of the priests. She turned her head slowly. You know what's under us. He didn't answer. But his silence confirmed it. Kenna leaned in. You're meant to be part of it. Naya stiffened. The thing you call it, she said, her voice shaking, you've kept it sleeping with blood. With bodies. With silence. He smiled. You understand now. You've built your power on sacrifice. On order. Naya's breath came in short gasps. You were never meant to see this, he added, voice low. But now that you have, it's time to decide, do you feed it, or become the offering? The soil rumbled. A tremor passed through the floor, gentle but undeniable. The air thinned. And Naya heard it. Heard it. Not a voice but a calling. A hunger. Ancient. Reaching. The thing beneath was waking. Not fully. But enough to know she was there. Enough to taste her name. She collapsed onto the floor. And the memories poured in. Every child who had gone missing. Every illness that had taken the young, the poor, the voiceless. Every death passed off as punishment from the gods. She saw the cult. Not all the elders. But enough. They had met in silence. They had carved the offerings. They had rewritten the rituals passed from the old days into masks of holiness. They had made a pact. In exchange for protection, for rain, for power, they would feed the earth. Keep the thing asleep. A being without name. Just hunger. She shuddered. They had wanted her to heal here, so the chapel could taste her spirit, decide whether to keep her or consume her. She rolled onto her side. I see you, she whispered. To the thing beneath. To the soil. To the lies. I see you now. The chant stopped. They stared. You felt it, haven't you? She said to Ikenna. That it's stirring. You're losing control. He stepped back. The old ways are breaking, she continued. It's not fed enough. It's hungry. She stood, trembling but upright. And it doesn't want silence anymore. It wants witnesses. The walls of the chapel groaned. Somewhere deep below, something moved. Not closer, but wider. Expanding. Cracks spidered across the floor. Father Udo shouted a prayer, not to cleanse but to contain. Naya laughed. You fed it so long you forgot what it was. She placed her foot squarely in the center of the chapel. The stone glowed faintly. It pulsed beneath her heel. And she felt it, rage, sorrow, hunger. But something else too, something strange. Recognition. It knew her. It had tasted her blood when she fell into the fire. It had marked her. I'm not yours, she said to the voice in the floor. But I know your name now. Ikenna lunged for her. Mama Eek burst through the doorway. No, she screamed. Don't touch her. But it was too late. Naya turned toward them all and declared. You feed it. I'll bury it. And the ground shook. Not a tremor. A warning. Then it went still. She left the chapel without help. And the soil remembered her step. They thought Mama Eek would die in silence. After the blinding, after the trial of ash, they dragged her from the square like an afterthought. The council declared her unfit, a dangerous woman who had let madness take root in her bloodline. They locked her in the old yam house near the river's edge, where the mud walls sweated and the air stank of mildew and wet rot. She was left with no light, no food but scraps, and no one to hear her cries. But Mama Eek did not cry. She waited. The first day she sat perfectly still, listening. Her eyes were sharper than most, even in the dark. Her ears sharper still. And in the hum of mosquitoes, in the shiver of reeds, she began to trace a new rhythm, not of the land but of the air. The wind had changed since Naya's blinding. It had weight now and voice. The second night, something whispered to her in a language older than memory. On the third, the door creaked open. Not broken. Not forced. Just open. There were no footprints. No guards. No witnesses. Just the hiss of grass parting as she walked barefoot into the night, her back straight, her mouth silent, her hands fists at her sides. When she returned to the compound, Naya was seated alone under the old avocado tree, knees drawn to her chest, head tilted toward the sky. She knew before hearing. Grandmother. Mama Eek stepped from the dark. You've grown, she said softly. They think you're dead. I let them think it. She paused. You've been listening. Naya nodded. The wind tells stories now. And the soil? Still grieving. Mama Eek knelt beside her and pulled her into an embrace. It was not soft. It was not gentle. But it was strong, like binding roots around a storm. Naya held on, burying her face into the old cloth at her grandmother's shoulder. You came back. I had to. They sat for a long time. When Mama Eek pulled away, her face had changed. Older, yes, her hair more silver than before, but her eyes burned like they had when she stood against the council, fists raised and voice unshaking. I will teach you now, she said. Not how to see. That's not what you need. Naya nodded. I'll teach you how to use what's already inside. That night they began. Not with words but with silence. Mama Eek drew a circle in the dirt. Then another within it. Then a third. She took Naya's hand and pressed her palm into the center. Naya felt heat pulse through the ground like breath. The ancestors don't need eyes, Mama Eek whispered. They live in bone and shadow. In ash. In the spaces where we've forgotten their names. She mixed ashes from the hearth with red clay and herbs, ground them until they formed a thick black paste. With her fingers she painted a line down Naya's spine, then her arms, then her chest. These are not just marks, she said. They're doors. Naya's skin tingled, burned slightly. But she did not flinch. Each mark remembers someone. A pain. A promise. On her right shoulder Mama Eek painted a spiral. For the child you saw in the forest. On her left wrist, a sharp triangle. For the voice in the wind. At her sternum a single dot. For the truth they tried to burn. When she was finished, Naya stood. She could feel her heartbeat echo in the marks. Like small drums under her skin. That night, the wind changed direction. It came not from the hills but from below, as though the earth itself had exhaled. The trees leaned toward the house. The leaves didn't rustle, they murmured. Naya stood outside, head tilted. They're coming, she said. Mama Eek joined her. The dead. Not all. Just the forgotten ones. The stars flickered overhead. And then Naya saw them. Not with eyes, but with memory. Shadows moved at the edge of the compound. Not threatening, just curious. Some were tall. Some hunched. A few were no more than glimmers. They didn't step, they drifted. The air thickened around them, but not with cold. It was like standing in a room with all your dead relatives, watching silently from the doorway. Do you see them? Naya asked. Mama Eek smiled. I remember them. One figure came closer. It had no face. But it bowed its head. In its hand it held a woven doll. Naya gasped. Tobe, she whispered. The child whose death had opened everything. He stepped forward, hand out. She reached without fear, her fingertips brushing the air where his palm should be. Warm. Solid for only a breath. I thought they would rise in anger, she murmured. They do not want revenge, Mama Eek said. They want names. They want to be known again. And the thing beneath the chapel? It fears what you're becoming. That night they did not sleep. They painted more symbols. Not just on Naya, but around the compound. On trees, stones, doors and walls. Glyphs that welcomed memory. Symbols that softened the edge between breath and bone. The spirits lingered just outside the ring of symbols. They did not cross. But they watched. And they waited. By dawn, the first villager had seen them. A woman carrying water, who dropped her calabash and screamed. She swore she saw her mother standing near Naya's hut. Dead 15 years, but holding the same necklace she was buried with. By mid-afternoon, 3 others came forward. I saw my brother, one said. I smelled my father's pipe, said another. My daughter's laughter woke me, whispered the last. They didn't accuse Naya this time. They didn't throw stones. They came to the edge of the compound and left offerings, quietly, quickly. Mama Eek watched them. They know now, she said. The truth is louder than the fire ever was. Naya nodded. The markings on her skin pulsed again, warm, rhythmic, alive. I can feel their stories, she said. They're beginning to move. Not to harm. No, she agreed. But not to be silent either. That night, Naya sat beneath the stars, the glyphs around her glowing faintly in the moonlight. She tilted her head and whispered into the dark. I am ready. The invitation arrived on stiff palm paper, hand-delivered by a trembling boy no older than 10. He did not meet Naya's face, did not dare look toward the door where the glyphs still shimmered faintly even in daylight. The note was sealed with wax, bearing the mark of the council, a crude symbol meant to resemble a sun rising over hills, though Naya had always thought it looked more like an eye, half-lidded, blind. Mama Eek opened it with the tip of a blade. They read it together, silent. The council invited Naya to the Feast of Cleansing, an annual ritual repurposed now, they claimed, to purge recent unrest and restore harmony. A village-wide gathering in the square, open fires and long tables, drummers and dancers, blessings and speeches. And for the first time ever, a place set aside for her. They mock you, Mama Eek said. It's theater. They want to humiliate you in front of the whole village. Naya's face remained still. Let them. Her grandmother frowned. It's a trap. Then let it spring. The sun hung heavy and golden the evening of the feast. Smoke from roasting yams and goat meat curled through the trees. Laughter rang out, too loud, too forced. The entire village had been scrubbed and decorated. Calabashes painted in bright colors hung from doorways, flower wreaths floated in the well, and children wore bells on their ankles that jingled as they ran. But beneath it all was the sour tension of a field before lightning strikes. Naya entered alone. She wore a simple wrap dyed in earth tones, unadorned save for the fresh glyph Mama Eek had inked across her collarbone, a sigil of truth. As she walked into the square, conversation faltered. The drums softened. No one stepped aside, but no one blocked her either. She moved through them like smoke. At the center of the feast stood a long wooden table, its surface covered with woven mats, steaming dishes and ceremonial clay cups. Beside it stood Elder Ikenna, smiling like a man already drunk on the illusion of victory. "Naya," he said warmly, arms wide. "Our honored guest." She said nothing. He gestured to the seat nearest him, a stool carved with symbols that had once meant honor but now felt more like a pedestal for a lamb. She sat. The other council members murmured greetings, some with forced grins, others with eyes that darted nervously between Naya and the darkening sky. Father Udo stood and began the opening prayer. He spoke of light, of casting out darkness, of cleansing the village of stains born in the shadow. The villagers echoed his words, palms raised, some tears shed for the sake of show. Then came the food. Steaming platters of jollof, grilled chicken, smoked fish, fried plantains, yams soaked in palm oil, banana pudding, cassava cakes. It smelled rich, decadent, the kind of abundance the village hadn't seen since before the drought. But as Naya raised her head, the air shifted. The drums faltered again. A wind moved through the square, not hard, not cold, but dry, as though it had passed through crypts and carried the breath of those who'd never exhaled. Naya blinked slowly, and saw. They came first at the edge of the trees. Children. Not walking but gliding, barefoot, clothed in what they had died in, nightshirts, festival wraps, school uniforms. One girl carried a broken doll. A boy dragged a stuffed lion missing its eyes. Another girl, older, wore a scarf that trailed like mist behind her. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, mouths closed. None spoke, but they whispered. Not with lips, with memory. Naya heard them all. They called it blessing. They drowned me in the well. I didn't want to go. I kept the secret. I kept it. Naya's hands curled around her knees. Her marks pulsed under her skin. No one else could see them. But they felt them. Across the table, Elder Amobi dropped his cup. It shattered, splashing dark wine across the woven mats. "Who?" he muttered, staring beyond Naya. Beside him, a woman choked on a plantain, eyes fixed on the empty air behind Naya's shoulder. Her hands shook. She turned pale. One of the children had leaned down and whispered into her ear. Naya saw it, though it wasn't sight in the normal sense. It was knowing. The whispers began to spread. The girl with the scarf placed her cold hands on Ikenna's shoulders. He stiffened, mouth half open, trying to smile through the pressure building behind his eyes. Then the food began to rot. First the meat, going gray, curling at the edges, flies appearing from nowhere. Then the fruits, their skins splitting open, leaking dark juices. The cassava turned soft, weeping brown sap. The yams shriveled like fingers drained of blood. The villagers backed away from the tables. A child screamed. A woman fainted. The fire in the center of the square roared high, then blackened. Not smoke, flame. Black as pitch, twisting like a tongue. It hissed and danced without heat, without light. Just darkness that moved. Panic rose. Someone shouted, "The devil is here." Another screamed, "It's her. It's the girl." But Naya did not move. She sat in stillness. Because the children were now surrounding the table, each one standing behind a council member. Their mouths still closed, but their memories poured out, thick as smoke. Elder Amobi heard the girl he left in the hills. Father Udo saw the boy whose tongue he cut so he'd never repeat the ritual. Auntie Kulu gasped as the spirit of her own sister, long thought missing, took her hand. Some council members began to weep. Others shouted prayers. One rose and tried to run, only to fall to the earth, clutching his ears, shrieking that "they're inside me." Ikenna's face was soaked in sweat. "You did this?" he hissed at Naya. She looked at him calmly. "No. You did. You brought them back. They were never gone." The girl with the scarf leaned into his ear. Whatever she whispered made his mouth hang open. He began to tremble. His hand went to his chest, then fell limp. He slumped sideways off his stool and did not move again. No one approached. Naya finally stood. The fire snapped back to orange. The food collapsed into ash. The children were gone. The wind stilled. Only silence remained, thick and awful. She turned to the villagers. "They were not monsters," she said. "They were yours. And you gave them away." No one spoke. Not a single voice rose in protest. Then she turned and walked from the square. Behind her, the ashes of the feast were carried by the wind, scattering like old names being remembered. The forest breathed differently that night. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the insects or the stirring of animals in the underbrush. It was something deeper, a pulse in the roots, a trembling in the soil. Naya felt it before she even left the compound. A vibration in her sternum. A low hum that made the bones in her jaw ache. Something waking. She stood barefoot at the edge of the grove, the ground warm beneath her soles. Mama Eek had gone silent hours ago. She sat near the fire, head bowed, eyes closed, listening in her own way. Neither of them had spoken since the feast. Now Naya moved toward the forest without words, guided by sound and memory. Each step deeper into the trees thickened the air. It smelled of wet clay and something older, like dried marrow and rust. The path before her didn't exist to the eyes, but to her other senses it was clear. A thin ribbon of silence, leading somewhere it should not. She followed the voices. They were distant at first, chanted in broken rhythm, mumbled like someone praying through a clenched jaw. As she drew closer, the rhythm sharpened. Male voices, elders, speaking in a tongue not used in daylight. Their words were old, cracked by centuries of misuse. She didn't need to know the language to understand its purpose. Appeasement. She crouched low when she reached the pit. It was not the stone-lined shrine she had seen in dreams, not a temple, not a sacred place. It was a wound. An open sore in the forest floor, surrounded by jagged roots and crumbling earth. It went down deeper than light could reach, a spiral of blackness slick with age and offerings. They stood around it, 4 elders, bare-chested, ash smeared across their skin. At their feet lay a goat, throat freshly cut, blood still dripping down into the pit. The chanting stopped. The air thickened. And from the pit came the sound. A slow inhale. What? Guttural. Impossible. Naya's breath caught. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. And then she felt it. The presence inside. Not shaped like a man or animal, but more like a tangle of need and memory, long and coiled, folded too many times to ever be unwrapped. She could not see it, not even with her inner sight, but she could sense its form, and it was wrong. No eyes. No voice. Only hunger. The elders trembled. Take more, one whispered. Take it and be silent, muttered another. Their hands dripped with animal blood, and still they feared it was not enough. Then it stirred. A shape moved at the mouth of the pit. Not up, out. Something slithered near the rim and slid back, testing the edge between world and prison. A sound like teeth gnashing but deeper, like mountains grinding in their sleep. Naya stepped forward. She did not know why. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was the marks carved into her skin pulsing with memory. Maybe it was because she, too, had been made an offering once. The elders gasped as she emerged from the brush. Get back, one hissed. She's cursed. But the thing in the pit heard her first. It stopped. Naya approached the rim. No wind. No birds. Even the trees refused to move. She stood at the very edge, close enough to smell it. A deep rot, like old blood and grief turned to steam. The air shimmered. And then it turned toward her. Not with eyes. It had none. But it knew her. She felt it in her chest, a vibration like 2 drums aligning. Blind. Hungry. Like her. They faced each other. It did not reach for her. Its vast, unseen body shifted, coiled back into itself. It opened its mouth. She felt its heat, a furnace built on centuries of silence and sacrifice. And then it turned away. A groan rumbled through the pit. Not of satisfaction, not of fury, but of recognition. The elders stared, speechless. Naya whispered, "You were fed so you would sleep. But I was fed to wake." The thing receded. Back into the pit. Back into silence. For now. Naya walked back to the village as dawn tore gold across the sky. Her feet were bloodied. Her wrap was torn by brambles. Ash clung to her arms like second skin, and the symbols inked by Mama Eek glowed faintly in the places where memory ran deepest. Across her back, her throat, her brow. She did not rush. The land was quiet now. Not still, listening. In her chest, her heartbeat echoed with the same rhythm as the pit. When she reached the village square, the market had not yet stirred. No stalls were open. No mothers drew water from the well. No smoke curled from the cooking huts. The feast table still stood, now stripped of plates, flies thick over the remains. Beneath the ashes, bones poked through. She stood in the center of it all. And waited. The first to come was a child. Barefoot, blinking sleep from her eyes, a piece of cornmeal still on her cheek. She stepped toward Naya, paused, and stared directly into the space where Naya's eyes used to be. She gasped and began to speak. "My brother. I told him to hide. I watched them take him. I didn't stop them." The child began to cry, knees folding to the earth. The second was a woman, a baker's wife whose hands always smelled of smoke and bread. She looked at Naya only for a second and dropped her basket. Her lips trembled. "I lied," she whispered. "I said the child ran. But I sold her. I needed grain." She turned and fled. Then more came. Not drawn by summons but pulled, as if something in the marrow of the village called them forward. They gathered in the square, silent, blinking. Dozens. Then hundreds. Naya did not speak. She simply stood. And they saw. One by one their knees gave out. Some wept. Some clutched their faces as visions crashed through them like waves. Visions not from Naya, but from their own pasts. From choices they thought forgotten. From crimes rewritten as survival. The elders came last. Ikenna staggered in like a man struck blind, even though his eyes remained wide open. He fell hard crawling. "I can't unsee it," he rasped. "I see the boy, the rope, the chanting. Why do I feel it again?" Naya answered, voice low and steady. "Because your guilt has nowhere else to hide." Her sight, no longer hers alone, had become a mirror. The gift they tried to burn had spread, slipped through ash and ink and breath. Now, when they looked at her, they looked at themselves. It was never about her eyes. It was about what they feared would be revealed. A scream tore the morning. It came from the chapel. The ground shuddered. People turned in time to see the earth split, not a crack but a slow opening as though the village itself was yawning. The chapel groaned, its clay walls rippling. The bell above the door swung wildly, clanging without wind. Then, with a thunderous groan, the front of the chapel collapsed. Dust surged into the air. From beneath the floorboards, old bones rolled into the square, small, too many, too human. The pit beneath the village had opened its mouth. The people watched, trembling. A man with trembling hands turned to Naya. "What do we do?" She looked toward the ruin. "You remember," she said. "You say their names." He opened his mouth, and said the name of a cousin who had vanished when they were boys. Another whispered a child's name. Then another. And another. Each name landed like a drumbeat. The ground stopped shaking. The chapel, now a ruin, seemed to exhale. And from its shadow, a soft breeze stirred, warm, faintly sweet, like the first scent of new rain on old soil. Naya turned her face toward the wind. She smiled. Because now, finally, they saw. Years passed and the village forgot how to lie. Not because lying was outlawed or punished or feared. But because once you've seen the truth rise from the earth like steam from a grave, once you've watched the bones of children roll from beneath the chapel floor, once you've stood in a square where a blind girl made you see yourself, what need is left for deceit? The square still stood, though the long feast table had rotted away and no one dared replace it. The chapel's ruins were left untouched, half swallowed by wild grass and memory. No more sacrifices. No more whispered prayers to a pit. The wind no longer carried chants, only names, spoken gently, freely, with sorrow and care. Names of the lost. Names of the forgotten. Names that once fed hunger and now fed healing. And in the homes where children were born, there was always a hush when the first cries came. Always a pause when the midwife cleaned the blood away, wrapped the new soul in cloth. Because sometimes, just for a flicker, the newborn's eyes would shimmer like copper, or shift like dusk clouds in a storm. In those moments, the mothers whispered one name, not in fear but reverence. Naya. They didn't see her much. She lived at the edge of the forest, just beyond the reach of where the old thing had once stretched its hunger. Her hut was built from cedar and river rock, draped with prayer beads that clinked softly in the wind. No guards. No fences. Just a path no one crossed unless they came ready, not with questions but with truth. She was still blind. But her face had changed. Not with age, though time had carved some lines into her cheeks, but with stillness. The kind of stillness only found in those who had walked through the worst of the world and returned, not unbroken but unafraid. Children sometimes crept near, barefoot and breathless, hoping to see the infamous witch, the seer, the girl who burned with ash and came back with bone vision. She never scolded them. If they came respectfully, she gave them food. If they came curiously, she asked them questions that echoed long after they ran home. To the elders, she was no longer a threat. She was proof. A reminder. The woman who saw too much, and gave that sight back to the people. Some say the thing in the forest still breathes deep below. that the pit closed but not sealed, that the hunger sleeps but dreams. They say if you walk too far and if your heart is not clean, the earth might pulse underfoot and whisper things you don't want to hear. But it does not rise. It does not dare. Not while Naya is alive. Not while her eyes, blind though they may be, remain closed. They say her sight is folded now, turned inward. Not watching the world but watching the place between worlds. Listening. Guarding. Waiting. And they believe, no they know, that if the pit ever opens again, it won't be darkness that meets it first. It will be her. And she will know its name.